A man in a Highland kilt walked into a German headquarters with 23,000 armed troops and walked out with their surrender. He had no soldiers behind him. He had no authority to accept it. His name was Thomas Macpherson, Tommy to the men who worked with him. He was an officer of the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders, seconded to the Special Operations Executive for work behind enemy lines. Before Italy, he had spent the summer of 1944 in central France, learning how nerve and timing could substitute for firepower. That education began when he parachuted into the Auvergne in early June, wearing his regimental kilt. The kilt was not bravado. It marked him as a uniformed Allied officer, which mattered in a war where captured partisans were shot on sight. Uniformed soldiers had rights under the Geneva Conventions. It also made him visible and memorable, and his reputation spread quickly through the region. His mission in France was to link up with the local Maquis and slow German formations moving north toward Normandy after D-Day. The most important target was Das Reich, the 2nd SS Panzer Division. It was hundreds of kilometers from the front and needed clear roads to get there. Macpherson's team had no heavy weapons. What they had was explosives, local knowledge, and the ability to make a small force look larger than it was. They built roadblocks from felled trees and cut rail lines at choke points where detours were longest. They placed charges on culverts that would strand traffic for hours, not minutes. When a cut rail forced a train to wait until morning, Allied fighter bombers could find it at first light. Between the demolitions, they used bluff, fake mine warnings, exaggerated signs near demolition charges, and the uniform itself. At one roadblock, Macpherson walked toward a halted convoy in full Highland dress. He told the lead officer that the road ahead was mined and covered by heavy weapons. The officer heard what he expected from a staff officer, not a partisan. A shaped charge on a culvert behind the bend went off on cue. The convoy reversed a kilometer to a crossroads that led them further from their route. In the ditches, Maquis fighters lay still with rifles they did not fire. Each delay cost Das Reich hours it could not recover. The division took roughly 2 weeks to reach the Normandy front. Every hour it lost bought space for Allied infantry on the beaches. Macpherson's operations were one thread among many. Maquis actions, Allied airstrikes, and other SOE teams all contributed. But the pattern he learned in France would define what he did next. By spring 1945, the front in Italy was collapsing. German units were falling back from the Apennines towards the Po Valley. Some units were trying to surrender while others tried to escape. Staff officers negotiated in fields and farmhouses, and columns moved without clear orders. Into that confusion, a confident voice could carry weight far beyond the rank behind it. Macpherson was sent forward as a liaison officer. He had no platoon, no armor, and no authority to accept a formal surrender. What he had was the same thing he had carried through France: the uniform, the nerve, and an understanding of what exhausted men needed to hear. He arrived near a German headquarters outside Padua that controlled roughly 23,000 troops. The units were still armed, still organized, and still capable of fighting. If they chose to resist, the result would be street fighting across the towns along the Po. If they chose to move, they could complicate the Allied advance for days. Macpherson decided to make sure neither happened. He chose his appearance with the same deliberation he chose a demolition target. Full Highland dress, medals cleaned, Sam Brown belt straight, and a cap that belonged on a parade ground. He stepped out of his vehicle within sight of the sentries and walked to the main entrance without stopping. If anyone inside checked his authority, the entire performance would collapse. He had no force to back it up. The guard hesitated, then saluted the uniform. Macpherson asked for the commanding officer with the tone of a liaison, not a raider. He was brought inside. In the office, he laid out a picture the German commander could read. He said Allied armor was closing from 2 directions. He said artillery already had their coordinates. He added that fighter bombers answered his radio within minutes, and that bridges to the rear were wired for demolition if resistance continued. None of this could be verified from inside the building. And all of it was plausible, given what the Germans already knew about the collapsing front. Then he offered terms that fit exhausted men. Units could assemble in designated fields, stack arms, and receive protection under the Geneva Conventions. Senior officers could keep sidearms until formal processing, if the order was given promptly. He was not selling Allied victory. He was selling a managed ending. He framed the choice clearly: orderly surrender now, or disorder and destruction within hours. The commander studied him and asked how large the encircling force was. Macpherson gave an answer that stated presence without naming numbers. He said that delay would cost them any chance of an organized handover. The room went quiet. Then the German officer nodded and called for his adjutant. Orders went out to halt engines, ground weapons, and assemble by company. In the courtyard, the decision rippled outward. Trucks pulled into lines, tailgates dropped, and rifles were stacked. Equipment was unbuckled and set down across the cobblestones. Macpherson walked outside and stood where everyone could see the uniform and the medals. He handled small frictions immediately, directing a sergeant to a field, a lieutenant to a shed for maps. He did not allow time for doubt to reverse the momentum. To confirm the surrender was real, he had a signalman place a field call that produced a British voice on the line. Arrangements for collection points were made in clear language that both staffs could hear. The sound of competence replaced the fear of confusion. Company after company turned in weapons through the afternoon, and batteries parked their guns muzzle down. Trucks queued at bridges not to flee, but to deliver men to assembly areas. By nightfall, roughly 23,000 men had accepted that their war was over. There had been no firefight, no bombardment, and no casualties on either side. Collection points were established, guards posted, and columns marched under escort. Macpherson reported the capitulation up the chain, while liaison teams began processing names and units. The surrender removed a large armed force from the field without street fighting in the Po Valley towns. It worked because of a specific combination. The collapsing front made resistance pointless, but that alone did not guarantee capitulation. The uniform signaled authority Macpherson did not technically possess. The offer of orderly treatment gave officers a reason to comply, and the speed of the sequence left no gap for second thoughts. In France the previous summer, every hour Das Reich lost had bought time for Normandy. In Italy, one walk through a headquarters door secured an entire front sector. A uniform, a clear offer, and the nerve to deliver it before the other side could think twice. That was the method in France, and it was the method at Padua. If you stay for wartime stories built on bluff, timing, and nerve, subscribe and stay with the channel.